So friends, like it says in the book of Revelation, he who endures to the end will be saved. And thank you for enduring to the end. But this part of the conference, our conclusion here, it says conclusion, conference conclusion and next steps. I don't have another paper to read or a kind of definitive concluding, I guess, result or remark. I'm much more interested in learning or hearing you think about, or what you might have to say about what we could do next, or what you'd like to see done next, or anything else that you have, any part of a vision that might be something that would be ongoing. Could be projects you're interested in doing where you are, as Bishop Walk was talking about. Maybe we could participate in some way. We don't have to either. But I'm just wondering what thoughts you might conclude with, especially ideas you might have for further work, further conferences, further anything. So I wanted to give you all an opportunity to comment in that way before we actually called it quits for the conference, this one. And we have a microphone somewhere, I think. If not, I'll go get it. I'm taking notes too. And this is not being live streamed.
Have y'all, has the Institute had an opportunity to present this to, maybe even in an abbreviated form, to the gathering of the U.S. bishops?
The who?
The U.S. bishops, the Catholic bishops, at one of their conferences. Have y'all had an opportunity to address them about this concept of co-responsibility?
We actually, haven't. Though we're not opposed to it, certainly I'd like to. Yeah, I think that some of us have spoken at different USCCB-sponsored events.
Will be your ambassador.
Yes, I hope so. But I have spoken there, but not about this, though we're certainly open to doing that. Thank you.
Clara and I were just speaking at the break about how encouraging it is to see that similar conversations are happening at so many different levels and regions of the church. She's from Australia, and they're having very similar conversations. The one thing that I noticed is that I'm a relatively newly ordained priest, and I seem to be the only one here. It was very encouraging to hear Monsignor Heinz talk about his experience of forming seminarians. My question and somewhat concern is, to what degree does the formation for co-responsibility happen at the seminary level? And the reason I ask the question is because unless seminary formators are very intentional about this kind of formation in governance, as Father Michael was saying yesterday, it's going to be a dream, because canonically priests are entrusted with governance. So it's not really a question, more a comment of what can the McGrath Institute do to help at the level of seminary formators. I know that there are gatherings of seminary formators that could be an avenue.
Thank you. Are you following up on that?
I have another question that does follow to it, but not exactly. So if you want to address it, go ahead.
Something that occurs to me about that is that I think that kind of formation, if we're going to integrate what we have been calling the four pillars of formation, including the intellectual and the pastoral and the spiritual, it seems like, at least from what I've read, the part of that would be, what should happen in ecclesiology. It should happen in a kind of recovery of a kind of deep reception of the ecclesiology of communio that we've been encountering as we've gone along. Kind of deep dive into it. I'm not sure that, well, I don't know if that happens. But I think it would be, all I'm saying is it would be a mistake to think this would be something like in the domain of applications and not something in the domain only of applications and not something in the domain of theology properly speaking too. That's all.
Sure, I think it has to be both theological and ministerial in terms of formation.
So my I guess, question to the Institute would be, would it be within the purview of the McGrath Institute or perhaps Notre Dame to develop a curriculum of human and spiritual formation for even our newly ordained people, if not in seminary formation, in this area, sort of like the Institute for Priestly Formation out of Creighton, where, because I'm also a spiritual director in addition to being a campus minister, and even in directing summer retreats with different priests who are really struggling with being able to even pray with people because their formation didn't teach them how to do that. How do I pray with my people? One-on-one, meaning not liturgically. So I think that could be something out of this that could be really useful and helpful, would be the development at least of a core values that would guide such formation, because I do think people are very hungry for it and would be grateful for it, but there's not even a starting point right now, I don't think.
Did you say human and what formation?
Spiritual. Human and spiritual formation.
Yeah, and you're thinking of, let's see, a curriculum of human and spiritual formation, or even before that bigger step, a kind of summer workshop, or
even a partnering with IPF.
Right, some kind of partnering with something
yeah.
like IPF.
I see, yeah.
But even so, like, just something that touches those parts of human formation. You know, how well can you focus and listen? How well can you be present to yourself and self-aware? How well are you present to the presence of God in what you're doing in this moment in ministry, as opposed to fitting a box or performing a service, but you yourself, because I think there is something about that idea of the self-giving that we started out with in the first session, the kenosis, the letting go of my role, my idea, my mission, my this, my that, and instead saying what's best for the kingdom of God, and what is the Lord asking of me in this particular situation.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Claire Kilbane, and I actually am very involved in the curriculum development for the McGrath Institute, and so I'd love to follow up with a couple questions. So when we develop curriculum, we also have to think about the instructional approaches used, the delivery approaches used. Would you be willing to talk about the best mode of delivery for that curriculum? Is it a course? Is it a workshop that gets developed and facilitated locally? Is it speakers traveling for institute days? I'd love to hear what you think about that, and welcome anyone else to discuss that as well.
In my like Dee's perfect world, where I live a lot of my time, it would actually be a practica. So it would be something that it would be almost like CPE, but a little bit better, a little bit more focused, a little bit more about the church and about listening for the Lord's guidance in what I'm doing, instead of learning my best practice and then getting out there and applying it. And that takes sitting, being quiet, praying, submitting to spiritual direction, which a lot of people don't once they get ordained or once they get in full-time ministry, or they become a spiritual director, and then all of a sudden, well, I don't need one anymore because I am one, which is very scary. So to me, that's how I would envision it.
It might also be some, as I said, some kind of partnering with IPF. There's already over 200 plus seminarians that go through that program every summer. And they also have other things, their annual symposiums and things like that, that rather than developing yet another independent program, I certainly think, I like the idea of maybe something comparable to CPE, but maybe it's to start smaller with something that's already pre-existing. Those men are up there in Omaha for 9 weeks, and it is a packed program, but many of our seminarians around the country are going to that already. Even if dioceses didn't want to, might not want to host this or something like that, so to work with something that's pre-existing.
Thank you. I guess this is not fully formulated, but in thinking about practical next steps for this, I've been reflecting on how there are many lay people who are here and many priests and bishops who are here, and only a few teams of lay people and priests who are here, and so much of the practical implementation of this and how this is going to really be lived out comes in the teams of the lay people, the co-responsibility coming together and learning this together, and the implementation of this. I'm thinking about how I'm going to go back to the pastors that I work with and how I'm going to share this and how we can move forward with that. And I think as you are thinking about next steps and what next steps would look like, the implementation of how this can be shared with the teams who are going to be who are called and co-responsible together. Practically, I'm not entirely sure what that looks like, but I do think that would, I was really struck, ma'am, by your question yesterday of how, for the priests who don't have performance plans, your question stuck with me, how do we, how do we present any of this in such a way that's, is the teamwork, and that's for me, the next step in figuring out how that would be, so.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. We actually do work that way with our program in science and religion for high school teachers. We require a team to come from the school. So that would be a kind of extension of this with a kind of, theological grounding for it. Right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I see, thank you.
So thank you, John, for this opportunity. If I may suggest that the co-responsible, I would say, teaching forum that we had here, would be extended in different possibly in different countries, and addressed to the leaders of movements in the church. Big movements, organizations in the church, Catechumenats, Focolare, Charismatic Renewal, and so on and so forth, that who ultimately are in touch with hundreds of thousands of young leaders and also of lay people. If this, for example, could be a forum in Notre Dame for leaders of movements, but it could be, for example, another one in Europe, in Italy, to make sure that what has been discussed here, it would also come to the leaders of these big entities in the church, organizations, that ultimately will make the lay people aware of their responsibility, which many times, yesterday I was talking with someone out of this forum, and I was just mentioning about the importance of co-responsibility in the church, and it was completely new for this person. I said, wow, is this the way we should participate in the church? And this is within this campus, Imagine when we go back into our parishes, back into our dioceses. So I think the university and the institute here has a very prophetic voice that I would like it to be implemented. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good idea. These are all good ideas.
As a deacon who is a vocation director for our diocese and also a parish leader, there's something that I've noticed, in not just here but other places, where sometimes people need to learn discernment, and we need to understand that. So some of this comes in discernment, because I've been approached by several people not just here, saying, well, you're a deacon, you don't have any children, you'd be a perfect candidate to be a priest. You should be looking forward to that. But you know what? My happiness is exactly what I'm doing because I've discerned this. And sometimes when we start reaching too far out to make ourselves more than what we're really called to be, then we're starting to take the focus off God, and we're starting to make the focus on us. So I think sometimes we need to go back and take time to pray about this and decide where it needs to lead us to, because there's great things that can be done with all the things that we put, but we've got to learn how to put them and tie them in with the work of God and let Him discern with us on where we should go with all of this. Because when we're truly happy, we're using our gifts and we're building the kingdom.
As Bishop Walk reminded us. Thank you.
Amy Tadlock, Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. So I'm a canon lawyer. Don't hate me. But before I went to canon law school, I was a parish youth minister, and I had worked in the church for more than 10 years. Went to canon law school, and as I was studying canon law, I learned that the Code of Canon Law, our church law, articulates a number of rights and responsibilities of the Christian faithful. They list out the rights and obligations of the Christian faithful, and there's a subsection of the rights and obligations of the laity. And I was fascinated. I had worked in the church for more than 10 years, gone through Catholic school, Catholic college. I didn't know any of this. So what I'm wondering, or maybe proposing, is what does it look like to say, let's maybe first start with some of the structures that we have provided for us, and one of those structures is the Code of Canon Law, and those rights and obligations that are enumerated. And what does it look to say, what are those rights and obligations? How does one exercise them? What does one do if one feels that they're aggrieved, if those rights are denied, or they're not, or they don't have an opportunity to exercise them? So I'm wondering if that's something that's been on anybody's radar or explored, or maybe just offer that as a friendly proposal, that would be something that could be looked into.
Yeah, thanks. That's one of those obvious ideas that nobody thought of. Sometimes these ideas that seem obvious, they're actually not. That's what I mean. And I really like the idea. I think people have sometimes, maybe I'm wrong too, have a stereotyped idea of canon law, like this is a bunch of it's actually there to help people. Yeah, to defend. Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin Hayes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And first, I just want to thank the McGrath Institute and everybody who's touched the planning for this conference. I think it's just been great, without necessarily knowing or having the answers before the conference or necessarily what would happen, just pulling people together and saying, it'd be good to get together. And I just want to build on that in suggesting that I think experientially it's good for lay people as well as professed people to be together and talk about this idea. And so I think maybe workshops or week-long forums the McGrath Institute could hold to, in some ways, ramp up. I do like the idea of maybe bringing teams, but even if teams can't come, just getting more people engaged, and then also the experiential of being together and talking and hearing different perspectives, I think is very helpful with this topic going forward.
Thanks. That would kind of fit under the category of formation for lay people, like we heard in one of the panels yesterday.
Michael Terrian, also from Pittsburgh. Experiences like this are really great. Just to get together, take time to reflect on these very important concepts. One of the things that I've experienced in my own work in the diocese is what we call the knowledge practice gap. And those of us who are working in the diocese, we get really excited about concepts, and then we go out and try to share them with other people that didn't share the experience that we had, and they just kind of shrug their shoulders, or even if they got excited about it, maybe they participated in something and got excited, then they couldn't implement it. So there's an informational process, which I think an experience like this is, but there's also a transformational process, and that was probably the biggest, steepest learning curve for us, and continues to be, is how do you transition from the way we are doing things to the way this vision tells us we ought to be doing things, and how do we move through that change so that we actually get to where we aspire to be. So again, just something to throw out there for McGrath to think about is maybe designing a process of accompaniment that can walk with leaders out there in the field to go from A to Z as they move through that process of applying what they've learned of these concepts and trying to be transformed as a leader to be the kind of person that can deliver this kind of practice or whatever. So, maybe something to think about in terms of future offerings or
Did you say design? What was it?
like a transformational process. So there's the informational stage. We have to understand what the concepts are, like co-responsibility, but then how do I implement it? How do I move and lead my community or my team from here to where we operate in this new way? That's where it breaks down. People get excited and then they get disappointed because they can't make that transition. So it'd be a great service to be able to walk with leadership teams in parishes or dioceses to kind of accompany people through that transformation of how they operate as an organization, whether it's parish level, it's an apostolate, it's a diocese.
Yeah, you probably have to help me with that because I don't know how to do it. But if you do, that would be a big help.
Hi, my name is Samantha Pavlak. I am the founder of something called Femme Catholic. It's a blog and conference platform, arguably a lay movement for evangelization on women's issues in the spirit of church teaching and abiding by church teaching. And I just wanted to share my experience. Was wonderful, and I felt very affirmed coming to the conference. I really appreciated Bishop Frank's points 2 nights ago about asking hard questions, because I have seen that a lot of women, particularly millennials who were raised cradle Catholic but not formed well, when they grow up and encounter a world, as Carrie Robinson talked about, that is inundated with the feminist mantras of, birth control and abortion are essential for equality, and women are allowed at all areas of leadership. It's very difficult to reconcile those seeming differences with the way the Catholic Church operates. And I think asking those hard questions and not being afraid of them, to answer them within the bounds of our church, is important. So I appreciated that affirmation. And that what I have seen is that many millennial women in particular, are chomping at the bit to serve and to be co-responsible. And in the secular workplace, millennials get a bad rap for thinking we have it all figured out and being ready to jump on a project. Let's take advantage of that. Let's grab them and say, let's go. And I think that just, there's a million programs out there. I know we talked about maybe just being aware of our neighbor, and Colleen Moore talked about that, and asking them, what are you going through and how can you respond in your community? I think that there are a lot of, especially the millennial church, that would be excited to do that. Just being told that is your role. Because I have met so many women who still will tell me okay, well, I guess I have to ask a priest, as if a priest is the only person in the entire church that can give any sort of affirmation of what's going on. And it goes back to this whole conversation we're having. So I'm really encouraged by the fact that this conversation is happening. And I think that there's a lot of hope.
Yes.
Thank you.
I wanted
And
to
any
follow-
ideas you have about it, I'd be happy to receive them.
I wanted to follow up on the gentleman from Pittsburgh. What I hear is we come here, may or may not have our team to come. I was wondering whether or not the McGrath Institute ever thought of taking teams to the parishes, simply because the energy would remain, hopefully, would remain there. And your remark about, well, what does Father say? People would be hearing the same thing, and Father would be there to say, well, this you may need to give me I don't need permission to do this. And I think someone from Italy the other day said, we just did it. We didn't ask permission. But as a woman, I can certainly understand that. But the team going out to the different parishes with the bishop's permission, of course, it just seems to make a lot of sense because you're going to reach a whole lot more people in the diocese than the diocese having to afford to bring people here. So.
Thank you. That actually corresponds to a model we have in the Science and Religion Initiative too. We do send teams out for Institute days in schools. So this actually would be the complement of the proposal to receive teams. Yeah, I see it. Thank you.
Just another follow-up on the comment from Pittsburgh. Over here, Jen. Oh, sorry. Just to follow up to the comment, I think there's a natural moment in parish life where the work of the McGrath Institute in forming people, teams, it's there all the time. When we transition to a new pastor, I mean, it's right. It's a moment of death. It's a moment of birth, and it's a moment when people will be open to change. So just again, part of that conversation.
I'm just going to follow up on my colleague Amy on canon law. McGraw maybe should know, if you're going to go into that, the really, really good resources for canonists are not in English. I studied in Rome, so I had an advantage. I could read there. But we have some good resources here, but the best aren't in English. I mean, I was a director of Gratianus Press. I put out 34 books in canon law, either as editor, translator, author, and that's a drop in the bucket. So if you just pick up on that, we need more, at least in canon law. I did a lot of penal cases too. Penal law has really got a dearth of them.
Say that again, I didn't quite get it.
Penal law is another area. You know, the laity, we're lost. I mean, I can't really even say to you, go read this. You know, I can tell you, while Bishop Walk was talking, I looked up the Amazing Parish, and they got a great website. So go there. But we don't have any real good resources in English in a lot of the areas of canon law. So if you're going to do something for the laity, really blast it in social media so it's available to many people, whether you're streaming, whether you're reading, e-books, whatever. But we're really hurting for a lot of resources in English. And I found that in penal law. I did work in parish mergers, defending parishes. Nothing there either. So that's an area we really could use your help on.
Thank you.
John, thank you for your leadership in convening this type of gathering. I have participated in events like this over the last year and a half since the summer of 2018, Leadership Roundtable. And this is the kind of experience or something I expected to see at the Conference of Bishops at some point. But it just doesn't function that way. And maybe it shouldn't. There are certain things at the Conference of Bishops only it can do. And maybe this problem that bishops have created, as I firmly believe, is only going to be solved with the assistance of the laity. And so lay-led events like this are, I think, a very important and much-needed part of resolving or solving the problem of the twin crises. I think, too, and I don't know if it's within the mission of the McGrath Institute, but we actually need to understand the problem better. Whether we're talking about the way bishops are making decisions, understanding how something like McCarrick could happen, my fear is that we might be holding on to certain ideological myths that would explain it, our own filters, our own prejudices, when in fact that may not be the problem. And we really need to identify the problem in order to resolve it. The same thing would apply to seminaries. I would wholeheartedly agree that we need to thoroughly look at our seminary formation and how it's structured. But I would also say that from some of the comments that I heard, and I very much understand, and I've experienced some of the very same things with some of the new recruits, but there's also a lot of good being done in a lot of seminaries. Very healthy formation that is going on. So I kind of think we need two kinds of studies or surveys or something that's methodologically sound. One is understanding the whole abuse of power by the hierarchy, the decisions they have made.
What was that?
The abuse of power by the hierarchy, and looking specifically at the handling of clergy sex abuse cases, the bad decisions they've made, the turning the blind eye, and all of that. We need to surface what are, in fact, the commonalities, the correlations, the factors. Secondly, we need to assess our seminaries again. And I don't think we need to wait for an apostolic visitation. Again, they're not set up to act adequately. We almost need to develop a tool of assessment with regards to how co-responsibility is part of the culture of the seminaries, not just the academic teaching. So we need studies. I don't know if that's within the realm of McGrath Institute or if you would be a player among others within our country, but as far as I'm concerned, we should be throwing everything we've got within the church at this problem. And we've got a lot of great resources like Notre Dame, like all the many Jesuit universities as well that have lots of resources, as well as other entities. And I think the failure in leadership has been from the bishops in regards to convening those entities, aligning them in order to do what we need to do. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. We are working on a piece of that, but this is a larger thing. Maybe we could talk about trying to figure out how to undertake a bigger piece than we're thinking of.
Just to also build on what the bishop said, and part of this could be generational. I'm part of the Vatican II generation, and meaning I grew up during the council and during those years right after. So, very different experience. But I think it might be helpful for McGrath, because you're so good at these things, and one of the obstacles to co-responsibility is differences in ecclesiology and our understanding of church, et cetera, et cetera. And I love what the bishops have done with this Civilize It movement that they've put out. It's like our culture is so divided, and we all know that, but we're divided in the church. What makes a real Catholic? Boom, 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 boom. Well, but over here it's boom, 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 boom. If you could do something that got all a good, a cross-layered sense of ecclesiologies in the same room, where we really got to talk in a civilized, wonderful, charitable way with one another about the value. I know Dulles is old and we've worked Dulles to death, but Dulles, I think, still stands true that all of those aspects of church are absolutely necessary to be church. And it isn't this is better than this or more or whatever, and I'm sorry, I'm talking too long. But if you could pull something together that could get a cross-section, and I think it would be a really great gift to the church. It would be incredibly helpful in terms of co-responsibility also. So, thank you.
Thank you. Here's someone who's had their hand up a long time. Right there.
Okay, you go first, then.
Thank you. I think these are all really great topics that we've started talking about, and I had the privilege of being with the Leadership Roundtable last week in DC, where we were talking about these things as well. And something that I brought up to our table is the focus. We talk about laity, we talk about the priesthood, the ordained, and I feel there's a bit missing in talking about church staffs. And we're seeing a change in, at least in
church
my
what? Sorry.
church staffs, the people that we hire. It's no longer the secretary and the bulletin maker. Now we're bringing in DREs and professionals, people who want to serve the church with education and with so much experience and desire to help and change the church. Yet there's a gap. There's a gap between the voice of the staff and parishioners. And I was told by a priest that church staffs have less of a voice than the lay faithful because they have nowhere to go. If you go to the diocese, if you can talk to somebody at the diocese, you'll be pigeonholed, or they'll tell your boss, or they'll do something with that. And so, but yet we're the ones working closely with the people of the staff or the parish as well, and we're liaisons between the priests and deacons and all of that. And so I'm just wondering if there's a focus or something that we can learn from parishes who are undertaking that. And I'm the chief operations officer for our parish. We introduced that model to the diocese, yet there's such a misunderstanding of what that means. And I'm part of a leadership with the priest and a deacon. And so how does my voice as a woman, as a lay person, maneuver within that circle as well? And it'd be nice to see, maybe we could see presentations where the priest is standing with their COO. They're having a conversation together with participants, with fellow folks who are working with the ordained, and seeing how it works and hearing about how it's still not working, or the places that were really, some pain points for us, but we're still moving it forward. So I think we're all talking about some of that, like where do we take this next? What does it look like? But also hearing from people who have been trailblazers, who have led the way, but been burned by the fire as well. So those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. That's a hard one. I'd like to, first of all, begin with something everyone else has said, which is how grateful I am for the McGrath Institute and meeting so many people I've never met before. We all love the church. We're all in this together. It's a beautiful thing, so thank you. I feel very much buoyed by this couple of days. Just briefly to follow up on Bishop McKnight's point, I actually agree fully that seminaries, I'm committed to this right now, it's what I do, and I would actually suggest humbly to the bishops gathered here that rather than worry about ATS being our accreditor, it's an outside institution, I work with them, they do good work, but they're not Catholic fundamentally, they don't understand what we do as seminaries, as Catholic seminaries. I wonder if perhaps the Bishops' Conference, instead of an apostolic visitation, could actually take over accrediting Catholic seminaries in this country and coming and holding us accountable to the bishop's office and to our mission, because they understand it in a way that outside institutions wouldn't. I don't know if it's feasible or possible. We have an office for seminaries, I believe, and to me that would be a very helpful thing. We'd be able to communicate more frequently and better with one another. We'd be on the same page, and the standards for accreditation would be determined by the bishops of the country rather than by an external organization. Yeah, and having been through 3 of those myself, accreditation hearings, it would be great if they were actually more targeted and more, had the instincts of a Catholic place instead of feeling like you're jumping through a lot of hoops to get an accreditation, which in some ways doesn't even matter anyway. Don't repeat that.
Thanks. This was wonderful. Two quick. Two things to piggyback off of the comment made before. I feel I have a vocation, a calling to be a pastoral agent, pastoral minister, lay ecclesial minister, whatever you want to call me. I work in the church. I love that. I think a next step forward would be an understanding of what co-responsibility looks like when clergy is always, from my perspective, going to be my boss. And what does that look like? And from both perspectives, right? I'm not saying like, clergy is always going to be my boss. They need to be co-responsible and realize that. No, I'm also saying like, as a lay person, what does that mean I do to help whoever I might be reporting to help us have a co-responsible relationship? What does that look like? How do we give me those tools? And talking through that, I think that could be, because that power dynamic is going to be there. It is. or that relationship dynamic, not power, sorry, relationship dynamic. I'm trying, I'm learning.
It is.
The other thing that I guess, and that might be out there already. I will just tell you, I'm not the smartest person out there. So that might be out there already, and let me know about it, and we can nip that in the bud. The other thing that is probably already out there, and some people refer to this as ecclesial communities within our church, or communities, parish being communities of communities, but many people, like myself, I don't want to join one of those communities. I don't find my spirituality in those communities. I value them as being a part of our church. I see the great work that they're doing, and there are many young leaders. But as a layperson that just like went to mass on Sunday and loved my parents and got involved in my parish, as I've grown up and now an ecclesial lay leader, I can tell you that there's not a lot, and as a diocesan person now, there's not a lot that we give to our lay leaders of what it looks like or what it should look like to have an active spiritual and prayer life. What does that look like? Right? I believe, and I don't know this because I don't study what priests do because I got 4, going to have 5 kids. I got my own thing to do. But I believe there are, like, a priest knows if he's not living out his spiritual life, his interior life well. Right? There's some things that I haven't said Mass in 2 weeks. Well, problem, perhaps. I haven't prayed the breviary in 6 months. Let's talk about that. And maybe that's what that is for laity, but I don't think we've had that conversation and set those, calling them, right? Calling the laity to this deeper interior life, especially those who are in lay ecclesial ministry, that, you know, we often talk in very flowery language, and oftentimes in the lay circles, about filling your cup first and allowing your cup to overflow to others, which is true and beautiful. But then we don't often, but then when it comes to the next step of like, what does that look like to fill your cup? We're like, wherever you feel called to do that and fill up your cup, which in a sense is beautiful, but also in a sense I think we need some more structure in terms of like, do this. And allow the Spirit to kind of move you within this structure. So those are just 2 things. And the third thing is pizza. I'd like pizza at some of the dinners. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we have time for one more question. Hey, did you say you had 4 or 5 kids? I'm just kidding. I want to make one clarification. I didn't mean to eliminate power from consideration. It's certainly what I had been trying to say was that we don't want to reduce the church to a secular organization and to power dynamics. But especially in employment relationships, there are power dynamics, and they're very uneven often. And so I think those need to be, you know, looked at as such. That's all. Yeah.
The other Catholic university in Indiana. There has been several talks that have touched on, in our experience at Purdue, in serving 13,000 Catholic students, 1,100 families, about as Monsignor Hines was talking about, the low bar that really priests have to hit. And I think that applies to everyone that's working in the church, you know, to be joy-filled, to be prayer-filled, and to recognize it's going to require hard work. Colleen talked about it last night, about making neighbors of people who are strangers, and emphasis that we're putting this year on our ministry is creating friendships. Now, it seems like such an obvious sort of an idea, but people don't always know how to make friends. And it is the essential part, it seems, when Jesus said, somebody gave me on the day I made my first profession a card, and it quoted the Gospel of John, and I read it, and I looked it up, and it says, and greater things than this will you do. And it's like, oh my goodness, they're talking about me. They're talking about all of us. And guess what? We did. So 2,000 years ago, there was just a handful of people around Jesus, and now billions of people call themselves followers of Jesus Christ. There's amazing things that we did do. And I think for us, we see finally the most successful things that we're doing, and what we've touched on in this program is for all of us to be responsible and to recognize that it can't be the priests at St. Thomas dealing with those thousands of people. It can't even be the 15 staff. We're blessed to have 15 people and full-time staff people. Every single person that we minister to has to take on that responsibility of one-on-one conversations, knowing how to do that, knowing what to ask, recognizing it's going to require each one of us to move those people from being disengaged to engaged, to recognize that they have a parish that welcomes them and extends them a sense of hospitality, to train every single person that we have to be able to understand how each one of us is responsible for the neighbor, the friend, making the friend. We've got something going on this Lent. We started on Ash Wednesday. We have 5,000 people that come to Masses on Ash Wednesday. We asked every single person that came to Mass, this is what we want your Lenten obligation to be. We want you each day to ask one person, 5 words, can I pray for you? Can I pray for you? Our goal is 40,000 people in 40 days. I have my little card in my pocket. We fill it up so that they get into that habit. That's a way that we're going to form individuals to say, this is how I'm going to engage my faith, and after the end of Lent, that I'm going to continue to do this, that I'm going to continue to ask a person every day, I care about you, I want to pray for you, I want you to be a part of our community. And I think that we've done some really good things here about touching on those things. I think it requires a lot of hard work, though, to do it, and that responsibility that we all share in order to accomplish that.
Thank you. So, friends, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you all for coming.